Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another installment of the NTC podcast. You are listening to episode 72. Myself, Aaron Washington, Oliver Arruda are glad to be back with you guys on another episode. It's been a crazy offseason already, and it's just getting started. We're not even in free agency yet. The NBA draft just passed. If you guys have not checked out the draft show that Oliver ran with Aaron Perlstein, another member of NTC, highly encourage you guys to check that out. They dove into the Bradley Beal trade, and then they looked at some overall roster building philosophies that teams would be looking at right now in the midst of the changing CBA and things like that. So really good stuff. Oliver, always good to have you on, man. I feel like it had to have been at least a year or something like that since we've been on together. I know it's been a hot minute with everything we've had going on, but glad you're back on. Always great to chop it up with you. Hope you're doing well, man. I know it's been a fun summer for you back in the gym in Miami and all that good stuff. So thanks for taking time this evening.
Yeah, man. Happy to be back. Happy to be on the pod contributing to No Trade Clause publicly. We're still doing work behind the scenes and doing our best to put out the best product during the season. But being able to come back and get on the pods and stuff, it's really like rewarding and an awesome opportunity to chop it up about the game with like-minded people. So really happy to be here. Really happy to continue working with the brand.
I mean, really excited myself, man. I mean, we talked about it before we went live, but we're really trying to kind of wrap this thing up as we approach Summer League. We plan on being at Summer League again, everybody. We're going to record some content out there in the next 10 days or so once that all gets going. So definitely stay tuned for that incoming content. But for tonight's content, we're going to be looking at, first of all, the big-time trade that went down not too long ago between the Atlanta Hawks and the Utah Jazz. Oliver, this came as somewhat of a shock to me. I wouldn't even say it's necessarily the fact that it even happened. John Collin has been in trade rumors for I don't know how long now. It's been years since his name started getting floating around. There were talks about him and Trae Young not really having the best relationship. It looked like he was really just kind of underutilized last season for the Hawks. They didn't really have a lot of synergy. It looked like he was just out there not really playing the game that we know he's capable of. So now he finds himself in a completely different scenario playing for a team out west in the Utah Jazz. I love this move for the Jazz, getting a guy like that. I think it's the bottom of his market. But we can see just by the terms of the deal how low his market has become. All that the Hawks got in return is Rudy Gay, who I would say he's probably in the very twilight of his career. Don't know how many years he has left. And a future second-round pick. And I don't think the terms of exactly when that pick is going to convey or could convey have been announced yet. But nonetheless, seems like a very light return for somebody of the caliber like John Collin, who as recently as 1920, he was averaging about 21 points a game and 10 boards on 40% shooting from three. So you look at all that, and it can be a little bit surprising to see a return like this. But I wanted to float the question to you first to kind of start this off. As far as the return, what do you see about what the Hawks got back that either did it surprise you in any way? Do you feel like the market was just bottomed out for him? Were you caught off guard by just how little they got? Like, what are your initial impressions on what the Hawks got back in this trade for John Collin?
Yeah, look, like on paper, I think that it is pretty uneven. Just at like in terms of straight up assets and what the immediate impact that Collins could bring to Utah and Rudy Gay can bring to Atlanta. Like right on paper, it's pretty staggering. However, I think especially coming right after the Bradley Beal trade, the situations are a little bit similar where, and if you heard me talking about it on the last pod, I spoke about how the Wizards kind of felt like they had lost some bargaining power. Their back was against the wall. They felt like they reached their ceiling with the group they had, the core they had, and it was time to move on. And I think the rest of the NBA knew that and they recognized that. And when a team is back that has their back against the wall like that, why it's easy to pay below what might seem market value, because what other options do they have if they need to, like, they can't afford to wait any longer. Teams are tired of being stuck in the middle positioning of the NBA, playing seeds, just missing the play-in. It's not a fun spot to be in for multiple seasons in a row. And I think Atlanta really found themselves in the same position. If the writing is on the wall for several years, it just becomes, the return is just more and more difficult to, justify. And it's it's tough to see. So the pressure and the ability to retool, I think really just got to Atlanta, and they just felt like it was time. So, if you're a team trying to do business with them, why overpay, right? There's just no need. I will say, trying to find the silver linings from this deal, right? This new CBA could inflate the value of second round picks a little bit with the new second round exception that Aaron and I got into previously. Now those contracts won't necessarily have to go right into affect cap space. They can utilize that exception, put multiple players into that exception. So we'll see how that affects it, but I can see it being a net positive impact for second round picks and their value moving forward. And then the trade exception that Atlanta got, also a $25 million trade exception that will be available to them for the rest of the year. I think it's a nice asset to have moving forward, especially because even after this trade, Atlanta still has Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, Clint Capella. Like, they've got guys to compete still and make things interesting in the standings in the East. However, depending on how the season goes, one way or another, that trade exception could be super valuable in terms of taking on a big contract. They could absorb an expiring into that, get back some assets to retool for the following season, and make what could be a rebuild a little easier on them in the future. So,
right.
Those are kind of my takeaways. In summary, Atlanta had their backs against the wall, had to make the best of a shitty situation. And, I think they did what they could. Now it's just about kind of moving forward.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, those are all very valid points from the Hawks' perspective, and to shed a little bit more light on exactly what they got in return. We can't just look at exactly what they have in their hands right now as far as players go and even picks. You touched on it a little bit. It goes deeper into that trade exception. It's very valuable. And the interesting part about this, and Anil Gagna, our cap specialist, one of our cap specialists with NTC, touched on this in a pretty recent tweet a couple of days ago. But Atlanta actually already had a trade exception that was worth about $6.4 million. That's what they used to absorb Rudy Gay's salary. So Rudy Gay's salary was about $6.4 million. And they're going to carry out this trade after the new CBA kicks in on July 1st, which opens up the allowance of what they can take back a little bit from $100K to $250K. So it gives them a little bit of buffer room in order to accommodate that salary. So since they did that, the total trade exception for John Collins, that full $25 million. And I'm glad that Anil pointed this out, because initially you would think that their trade exception was going to be something like 18 or 19. But when you factor in the prior trade exception, it actually comes out to be about 20 million. They used their old one and then they created a whole new one that was worth about 4 times what they had before. So you think about all that, it actually makes a lot of sense for them to do this. They shed that salary going into 23-24. And of course, you and Aaron touched on this, that the new restrictions on teams spending over the tax into the apron and second apron, they're very punitive. So now they cut that down. They're going into next season with a salary of about $159 million. and it still puts them about $6 million or so away from the luxury tax. So they're not in range of the aprons. They're not over the tax. So they still have the flexibility. They still have their full taxpayer, non-taxpayer mid-level exception to use, which is about $12 million. That's a very strong asset if you're looking to go and upgrade your roster. So since they did this, taking off that $25 million for John Collins, I mean, that's a pretty hefty price. And I think another reason why the return was so low was because he had so many guaranteed years left on his contract. Yeah. So it's not like he was expiring. It's not like $25 million for next season and then you're done. This isn't a Chris Paul situation. It was a long-term commitment they still had, which was 3 years for, I think, $78 million total. So you look at all those factors combined, and it's like, it makes more sense as to why they might do this. Yes, you're taking a hit in the short term. You're losing talent. Even though John Collins was having trouble finding his way with this new roster, revamped roster, he's still a very good player. And I think he's actually being undervalued now, underrated a little bit. I think he's going to show that here once he moves over to Utah. So now that that's finished, it opens up opportunities for some of the other guys in the roster. First guys that come to mind are Saddiq Bey, more minutes for him. I'm thinking about more minutes for AJ Griffin. And then also a guy like Jalen Johnson, who, 2 seasons ago, his rookie year, he only played 22 games and he was playing about 5 minutes a game. He spent a lot of time with the College Park Skyhawks. And then you go to next season and he's actually playing some decent minutes, 15 minutes a game, 70 games total last season. So his role is increasing and his confidence is getting there. He's still very athletic. He's 6'9", great size, great versatility in that spot. So he has some characteristics of John Collins a little bit. So now his role is due to increase as well, as long as the Hawks don't bring in somebody else in that position to replace Collins directly. So looking at what Jalen Johnson might bring to the table in his production, I think it'd be really interesting to see him in a starting role next season. They might have liked to go with somebody more experienced, but I think either way he's going to have more minutes. But what do you expect from Jalen Johnson and those other wings that are going to take the place of where Collins was in the rotation last season?
Yeah, I don't think Jalen Johnson needs to be their guy right away. I don't think that responsibility needs to be on him or it necessarily should be put on him. I think, this was an opportunity for AJ Griffin, Jalen, and I am really high on Jalen. I think he had a stellar year last year and, he's really kind of boosted his ceiling and what he can contribute at this level to an NBA team and his stock overall. Coming out of Duke, I think this is the player that a lot of people were picturing this past season versus his rookie year. So super excited for him. However, I would foresee it being more of a kind of starting wing by committee setup to start out. They're going to have to play small a lot more, I think, and that could be something that Atlanta wants to do now with a younger group trying to develop, getting more transition opportunities, guys running the floor. And I think their newest draft pick, Kobe Buffkin, can contribute to that as he plays with a strong pace. He has the ability to push the ball in transition. So between, Jalen, Rudy, Saddiq, DeAndre Hunter, I think they can all, AJ Griffin, they can all, pitch in that wing spot and, get each one can bring something different to the table depending on a matchup of a given night, injuries. It's a long regular season if they can be extended even further if they make their way through the plan. So, having that versatility, and all these options at the wing for them, I think will serve them well moving forward, especially if they're trying to play with a faster pace behind their young backcourt. So
yeah, that versatility is going to be super important for them. And I agree. I think that's the best course of action for them is to take a replacement by committee approach. Don't have one guy that starts every night. Because like you said, I mean, guys in the NBA are not playing as many games as they used to on average. you're going to have guys miss game due to maintenance, due to whatever the case is, nagging injuries. Teams will play it safe. So in today's NBA, it really pays to have more depth behind those primary players. Guys are more valued than ever, as those 8th, 9th, 10th rotation players. So I think everybody's going to fill in for sure. DeAndre Hunter's had injury issues. Bogdanovich is probably going to struggle with some kind of ailment, and you just never know when those guys can go down. So I'm with you. That's probably the best course of action for them. I wouldn't be surprised if all those guys see pretty consistent minutes. But I think in any case, you're going to see those wings from last year that were lower on the totem pole each take a step up a little bit, play more of a role, be there more often, and we'll see what they kind of do with that opportunity. DeAndre Hunter in particular, a couple of, I would say, mediocre years. Still great player, great wing to have, but he's dropped off a little bit from that rookie season where it looked like he was taking a step forward. He was going to be an all-star or a borderline all-star for them. So really big season for him in particular, just due to the struggles he's had over the past couple of years.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think they've got the runway now to have really showcase the youth movement behind their wing core, and their newest addition, Kobe Buffkin, should only help give them clean catch and shoot opportunities, and moving on with a guy, moving on from the Collins Capella front court, right? I mean, there's just not a whole lot of spacing opportunities there, at least not this past season. Collins shot like 30% from three, off catch and shoots. So not ideal in terms of when you've got two ball dominant guards in their backcourt like DeJounte and Trey. You want as much spacing as possible for them to navigate and for them to pick apart defenses. So giving these guys now the opportunity to run, to get out in transition, make things happen on the fly with lots of spacing, I think it should bode well for them.
They definitely have a lot to work with still, even without Collins in the fold. Mm-hmm. We talked a lot about wings in this podcast already, and the situation has some similarities over there for Utah on their side of things. So now you're bringing in John Collins. Their rotation's looking very solid. They don't look like a team that's going to be down at the bottom of the rankings. They definitely weren't last season. It doesn't look like it's going to be the case this season either. They want to remain competitive. They want to stay in the chase for a play-in spot, possibly even make a playoff spot outright. And that's going to be very interesting to watch now that Collins is there. Walker Kessler is there after a fantastic rookie season. Taylor Hendricks, who they drafted a couple weeks ago, very well. And then also Keontae George, several players coming in here. It looks like they're going to have a solid rotation. So the first thing I thought about when this trade was completed is, what does the rotation look like now that they have Markin in there, and Olynyk, and Kessler, and Collins, Hendricks? You go down the line, there's a lot of guys there that will warrant a good amount of minutes. I'm just curious, especially when it comes to the starting lineup. It's like, okay, Collins' natural position is the 4. It seemed like last season that Markkanen really grew into his own as a premier scorer at the 4 position. Kessler is not a guy you want to play at the 4. So it just kind of creates somewhat of an interesting dilemma. It's a good problem to have. You have a lot of great players there, but they're going to have to figure that out in terms of the minutes distribution. Where do you play Markkanen? Where do you play John Collins? I think you can play Collins at the 5 a little bit, but it has to be a very specific situation. I don't think they're going to start him off there. And, Kessler is a good enough player. You kind of want to keep him in the fold as much as possible. So that's kind of like where I go to initially as far as like what the rotation looks like. But just looking at specifically like the 3 through 5, just curious on what you thought about it. You put a lot of your time and energy on the on-court product and how this is all going to translate to how teams are going to play, like just straight up when it comes to the games themselves. It's one thing to talk about the money and the picks and everything like that, but it's like, how is this going to work in the real world on a night-to-night basis? So any thoughts on how they might approach that part of things?
Yeah, I think to start out, Taylor's probably going to have to take a back seat, coming off the bench, kind of getting some spot minutes here and there. He will get opportunity. His like we just said, it's a long season. Things happen, injuries happen. He's got the talent, he's got the versatility to mesh really with any of these guys in any sort of lineup combination. So he will get his looks. In terms of the starters, I think it'll likely turn out to be Larry at the 3, John at the 4, Walker at the 5, but I think you're gonna a lot of opportunities for John and maybe even Walker if he. I don't think his calling card necessarily was like post playmaking or his ability to make cross court skip passes for his teammates coming out like when he gets doubled or something. But they're both going to have looks as two good aggressive screeners. You get them in a horn set at the top of the key, and John can face up and do a lot of things coming off of that elbow, whether it's hitting a cutter, getting a guy in an ISO situation, backing him down into the low block, and putting more pressure on the defense to collapse on him. So I think there definitely is a world where things work out. It's interesting because we were just talking about spacing or lack thereof when he was in Atlanta, and he is going to be with another anchor big in Walker Kessler, an emerging drop big who has a great skill to block deter shots at the rim. However, the difference between Atlanta and Utah are the guards, right? So there's no a heavy on-ball guard that constantly needs the ball in their hands to make plays. So I think John will have a lot more on-ball opportunities in Utah. And like I said, you could get a guard who can really just go and get the offense going and then sort of serve as like a cutter and an off-ball mover off of, John Collins as he attracts, stunts and people trying to affect him as he battles for post positioning, and the spacing can kind of work out from there. So it'll be kind of inverted from what he's used to in Atlanta. So right. I think that's how I see it working out. But who knows? Maybe Utah does go out and get a ball dominant guard who requires a lot of screens to be set for him in free agency. And we'll kind of touch on that a bit later. But overall excited to see how it unfolds. And that's what I see with this roster construction at first.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. They definitely have a lot of options. And the Collins dynamic in this team specifically, like you said, is going to be really interesting to watch because there are some similarities with Atlanta with the post play, with the type of big they have, but then also those differences with the guard play. So it might take a little bit of time for everybody to kind of settle into what they're going to be doing the best or what makes them most successful. But when you think about all the pieces in place, I mean, they're definitely capable of it. And, Markkanen, he didn't play much. I mean, he played a little bit of 3 last season. According to the position estimate over at Basketball Reference, he played about 20% of his minutes at the 4, 62% of his minutes 20% of his minutes at the 3, 62% at the 4, and then he actually played a little bit, 18% at the 5. The year before is where he spent the majority of his minutes at the 3. So that was with Cleveland. About 64% of his minutes were at the 3, and he had a good amount of success with Cleveland. He wasn't the caliber player he is today with Utah, but still very effective. So he can do it. He's been in that position before. And I think because he's had such a large amount of minutes played at all 3 positions in the front court, he's going to be able to kind of shape shift into whatever the team needs from him at any given time, depending on who's playing with. If it's John Collins, he could be at the 3. If it's Kessler, he can be at the 4, just whatever they need from him. So there's a lot of different ways they can go about it. But yeah, I mean, like you said, it's going to be one of the big things we need to look for in free agency from Utah is like what they do at the guard. They drafted a guard that has a lot of potential. Mike Conley is still in the fold. They can rely on him for a good amount of minutes, but they lack a little bit of pop there. They don't have that player that can just make something out of nothing. Jordan Clarkson, might still be in the fold. That helps a little bit, but he's not that cerebral breakdown screens, snake pick and rolls, get to the rim at a high level, things like that. So a lot of different moving pieces there, but I think overall they're going to have a lot of success there. And I would expect them to at least be in the playoff hunt again next season with the guys they've brought in the fold. So I would say they stick somewhere between 8 to 10 in that range. They still need to make, I think, a couple more moves to really be bona fide playoff contenders where they were previous to moving off of Gobert, moving off of Donovan Mitchell. But with everything they've built in there, they're in a great position. And you got to give a shout out to Danny Ainge. I mean, I'm surprised that GMs haven't learned at this point. If you deal with Danny Ainge, there's a great chance you're going to end up in a less than favorable position. He just somehow makes something out of nothing. He just gets things done. He brings in great assets. He gets a lot of draft capital, premium draft capital. So, if you go on our no trade clause page, the Jazz have a ton of picks over the next 7 years, a lot of great contracts, a lot of depth. So depending on what they want to do over the next several years, they can go in any different direction. But kudos to Danny Ainge. The coaching staff has been great. Everybody kind of fit into a nice role last season. I see that continuing. Major jump, maybe it's a little bit too early for that, but they're in a great place. I mean, you can't really ask for more if you're someone on that team that's managing all the assets and just trying to make sure that you're consistent year over year and you're just kind of building for the future.
Yeah, I think it's pretty impressive that in a 1 year span, after moving off of Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, two all NBA caliber players in this league, they can immediately put themselves back into playing conversations. So, like you said, kudos to their front office and for turning things around quickly. I'm pretty sure Danny's not used to being in a middle ground position. I can't imagine he likes it. So, doing what he can to move one direction or another as quickly as possible, as I think is the name of the game for him. But one thing I did want to touch on also in regards to this trade, and this is kind of the draft analyst scout in me that thought of this when I heard the trade is how this trade could impact a rookie and especially a player who was brought into the league less than a week ago, and he's a front court player and you're trading for a front court player. I hope that someone in the Utah organization kind of sat down with him and laid out what the blueprint is for his role moving forward with the organization in his first few years of development after the trade, because it might not be easy for a young player to take a trade like this in. If you thought you had a runway and that runway might look a little different only a few days into you being into the NBA. So I've actually gotten the chance to work with Taylor a little bit, got to see a small bit of his pre-draft process down here in Miami. And I know he's got a great support group around him. He's got really good people that are going to guide him through the situation and the circumstances. But I know that it could be difficult for a lot of other and young players in this situation. So just wanted to add a human element to, a move like this.
That's worth pointing out. It's tough for a guy like that. You're drafted pretty high, and you're thinking you're going into a situation where you're just going to have all the minutes you want, but it doesn't always work out that way. The NBA is a business, and things come at you fast. So hopefully he's ready to embrace that little bit of change and the way his season could go next year. And I mean, I would say that if he goes out, plays at a high level out the gate, I mean, he's still going to get a decent amount of minutes and have a great impact for that team. And his future is still super bright. So in that regard, he should be just fine. But with the draft concluded and these few trades to kind of get this season in gear out of the way, now we're moving into the free agency period, which it's hard to believe, but we're just a few days away from things getting started here. We're really just 2 days away from all the deals being announced in principle. Of course, the contracts can't be signed for another couple of days afterwards, but they can at least be agreed upon. So that brings us to a free agency preview of sorts. And I wanted to start here this podcast on this section by talking about a free agent that's off the market. So Nikola Vucevic has agreed to a 3-year, $60 million contract extension with Chicago. He was going to be a premier free agent at that position. He's in his 30s, but he still has an incredible impact on the court. He's a double-double machine. He has a floor spacing 5, which in today's day and age is very valuable. He's going to leave you hanging a little bit defensively. You kind of have to adjust your roster to compensate for what he lacks in rim protection. But nonetheless, he's still a very effective big. So I look at this deal. I see a very fair deal. It's not a super long-term contract. It's 3 years. That takes him through age 34, 35. He should be still pretty effective through that term. I mean, Brook Lopez is 35, and he's still very effective. So I think there's minimal risk in this deal. Vucevic is not a guy that's way off athleticism. He's a very smart player. He moves. He uses his skills, his footwork to make things happen. So I like the years. I like the annual value, average annual value, about 20 or so million a year. With the incoming TV deal and the salary cap rising and everything like that, seems very fair for a center that can give you approximately all-star level production for a given season. So I definitely like that. The part of the deal that's a little bit, I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily like a bad thing, but I feel like it caps you a little bit as far as being a Chicago franchise that's been in the play-in hunt. They haven't been able to break right into the playoffs and get a top seed or anything like that. It looks like it kind of firmly plants them in the position of being a good team, but not necessarily great. I mean, there's more to come. I'm sure they're not done making moves this offseason, but I don't know. I just feel like they can't really it caps them a little bit in terms of bringing a guy like Vucevic in. I don't feel like he's a guy that's going to get you to the next level. He's not going to propel you to championship aspirations, especially having somebody like DeRozan in there getting a little bit older, Lonzo not being available. So I don't know. I mean, their upside looks limited. I'm not sure how you feel about this, Oliver, but that's the first impression I get from it. It's a good, safe deal. It keeps them competitive, but I don't see a ton of upside from this kind of deal.
Sure. And, my 2 cents, I agree. I think it's a fair deal for both sides. For the team, you're getting a $20 million average annual value for a fringe all-star big, which I think can, take you a long way, and it could be good value depending on how the market shakes out with bigs, free agent bigs moving forward. But you are right that it does kind of limit in terms of building around what you would want to be a championship roster. And I don't think if and when the Bulls, reach a playoff resurgence again, I don't see it being with this current roster, the way it's constructed. That being said, this contract could work in Chicago's favor for that, if they go the other way, if they look to tear things down a little bit, because, like I said, approximately 20 million average annual value. We'll see what kind of escalators it has, if any. But ability to salary match now for Chicago in a midseason trade becomes a lot easier. You've got him making approximately 20 million a year. We'll see. And then you've got guys like Alex Caruso making $9 million next season with a non-guarantee the following season. So another flexible contract that could be appealing for some teams to take on. And Pat Williams, we'll see if he gets extended off his rookie contract. But if not, then you'll get another $9 million expiring deal that could work in your favor when coming up with trades, depending on how the start of this coming season goes, and they want to go in one direction or the other. Vooch could be packaged into a larger deal. So we'll see how things unfold in Chicago, but it's nice to have those not max level contracts, but a tier below a $20 million salary that could help with matching down the road. Think about the Lakers a few years ago when they were in the middle ground and they were looking to get better, and they were throwing around the Kendrick Nunn, Taylor Horton Tucker package like it was candy. They're offering it up to everyone because that's really all they had in terms of their ability to match salary, because everyone was either making max money or minimums. So, having some diversity in your cap sheet should be able to serve Chicago well, regardless of which direction they take.
Yeah, that's important to keep in mind when we're looking at these new contracts that are signed by these players. I mean, as long as you're getting a good value, you have an asset not only on the court, but like you said, a trade piece. And, if you want to package that deal with somebody else, if you want to just straight up trade, there's a lot of different ways you can go with that. So I think the fact that the Bulls got him on such a, I would say somewhat of a bargain contract, it's actually less. If it starts at 20, it's less than the 22-23 salary, which was about 20 million. So, you're going, or it was 22 million, it's going to 20. So, in that sense, you're getting a reduction in salary for a player that should be able to maintain about the same level of production. So all of that is really good for the Bulls. And they're going to need value like that, because you look at Lonzo Ball and the fact that he hasn't played in basically 2 seasons, that's essentially dead salary on their books. So in order to compensate, they're going to need some good value contracts on the books. They're going to need some guys that can come and contribute for not a lot of money. And they're doing that. Caruso, you brought, was another good example. We're talking about sub mid-level exception money. So that's a really good deal for them. So they continue in that direction with Vucevic. We'll see what happens with DeRozan coming up here. LaVine is signed long-term. So they definitely have some good pieces there. It's just about kind of finagling things to get them to a point where they do have more upside, because as it stands, and we're both kind of in agreement on this, you're not going to go much farther than the play-in with a roster like this. It just has too many holes, too many things missing from the guard spot. Their depth is a little bit lacking, so they have some work to do, but at least this Vucevic contract gets them off on the right foot in the right direction.
Free my man Dalen Terry. I want to see him get on the floor a little more.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like his game, like what he can bring in pick and roll actions, his length, physical tools. He's got to work on his shooting, but he's got the ability to impact the game on both ends of the floor and can be a great backup guard for them moving forward. And like you said, if you get value out of a guy like him, then it opens up the floor to give him a larger role and move other pieces to upgrade the roster. So
Right.
I think Chicago may need to put a bit of a larger emphasis on a youth movement. Get Io involved more. Well, we'll see what they do with Kobe White. But I wish they put a little more faith into their young bucks and give them some runway to continue to work on their game throughout the season. And we'll see what happens.
Bulls were in the play-in hunt last season. They were in that mix. They didn't quite make the playoffs. Another team that found themselves in about the same position were the Toronto Raptors. These two teams actually played each other in that whole play-in mix. So their fates were the same. Neither made the playoffs. The Raptors have a free agent of their own that they're going to have to make a decision on here very soon. That free agent, of course, being arguably the top point guard option in this class of Fred VanVleet. So we know that VanVleet has been an excellent pro, since he came into the league. He's done a lot of great things for the Raptors. He's been a great defender, pesky defender, tough-nosed guy at that position, able to, get a shot off the dribble, get into the paint, force help. So he brings a lot of great aspects to that team. It's just about what direction does Toronto want to go in? Do they want to maintain the core, maintain Siakam, maintain Pirtle, bring in VanVleet to supplement that, or do they want to lean into their youth movement a little bit? Drafting Grady Dick, it was a great move, it looks like, for the spacing element of everything. You still have Scotty Barnes, going into year 3. still brings a lot to the table, a lot of untapped potential, it seems like, with him. Gary Trent Jr. tapped into his player option. He's going to stick around for one more season. So it looks like they're like a perfectly balanced in that regard. They have a good amount of vets. They have a good amount of young guys. And it puts them firmly, like the Bulls, in a position where you're good, but you're not quite in that next tier to where you can really say you're confident in your ability to win a playoff series, make the playoffs, really make some legitimate noise. So where I wanted to steer this part of the conversation is exactly like, I mean, where do they go as far as their team construction? They can go two different directions. It looks like they've hit a crossroads here. You have to go one way or another. You can't push it off anymore. VanVleet is due for a big raise. Max or not, I mean, I think he's going to get near the max, if not the max. Just looking at a guy like that. It's an all-star player at the point guard spot. Very versatile. A key part of that team. Some nights he's the best player on the floor. Some nights he's definitely the best player for Toronto. So bringing him back could be very valuable. I wouldn't be surprised if they do bring him back on that money. We just got done talking about that new contract for Vucevic. If you bring him back, you're not stuck with him for the next however many years you sign him. You can always flip. You can always find a deal for him later on if he continues to play at a high level. There's ways you can go with this. They just have to be careful because we've seen with guys like Kyle Lowry that are a little bit smaller, they can age very poorly and it happens very fast. He Nation was about ready to riot against Kyle Lowry at several points last season because he just all of a sudden looked like this 36, 37-year-old. And we just don't know how that might affect VanVleet as he kind of gets a little bit older. But that's the question for VanVleet and the Raptors. And we'll see which route they go. But in any case, VanVleet's getting paid. I think that much is certain.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I think Fred is still a max player in this league. I mean, he just reached his, career high in assists per game. He's right around 7, hitting that mark this season. So still, providing a lot of value, maintaining his, scoring per game, finding the ways to impact the game defensively. I don't see his impact fading, regressing a lot with anytime soon. We could see a regression if he signs a max deal. We could see a bit of a regression towards the end of the deal, but I don't think it could be anything staggering. In terms of his free agency, I see Fred as the premier sign and trade candidate of this offseason. I think he could be the most likely to move, especially because if you look at kind of the cap space teams, I really only pinned like 2 that could be of interest. He's been linked to Houston a bunch, which could make sense, but I personally don't feel Houston should be going in that direction for, an immediate jolt of talent. I think they need some more time developing their young guys before they're ready to compete and, start building up key pieces around their young core through free agency. And then Utah is another cap space team that could make sense. I mean, I just got done saying how they don't have a ball dominant guard right now. And, they could really, between Fred, Walker, John, they could really create a strong defensive identity for themselves if that's the route they took. But again, if you're going to make a move like that, you got to be ready to compete like now. And whether or not a guy like Walker Kessler and, who I imagine would be a key role player in that on that team in Taylor Hendricks, like if how ready are those guys to go right into a winning situation with a lot of pressure and high stakes, given the roster construction around them if you do go get a guy like Fred. So with that being said, I think way more doors open up for him in a sign and trade in terms of what teams could be involved. I think is a different discussion that I can't really think of some great options off the top of my head. But still think he's worth a max player. could see a sign and trade for him in the near future.
That would make a lot of sense. And I think either way they go, they just really need to sign him, whether it's a sign and trade, straight up bring him back. Losing a guy of that caliber for nothing would be devastating for that team. We were just talking about how he's a max player. He's probably the best point guard option in this class. No disrespect to Kyrie Irving, of course, but I mean, he's probably going to come back for everything the Mavs give up for him. So you're looking at the best PG in the class. You're looking at, arguably the best player for the Raptors over the past few years. Of course, Siakam is in that conversation. But I mean, VanVleet's coming off of a $21 million year last year. His cap hold is 31, and you can expect him to make probably even more than that. Siakam's in the mid 30s to upper 30s. So I mean, VanVleet's going to be way up there in terms of money. He hasn't quite hit that 10-year mark. You can't get that where you're at when you hit the 10 years of service. He just finished his 7th year, but still he's in that I believe it's the 7 to 9 range, so you can still get a ton of money off that max deal. So I think it's in the best interest for the Raptors to bring him back, see where they go, run it back another year, and then hey, if something opens up down the road, if it's not this offseason, you can still deal him. You can still bring in younger talent for a team that's looking to compete right away. There's options, but you got to bring him back. He's worth too much to your team as an asset, whether or not he plays for you or plays for somebody else. Just having that money on the Bucks it just looks like it's too much to let slip through their fingers.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I wasn't when I say sign and trade, that's not necessarily my recommendation for Toronto. I'm saying if they do want to take that route where they don't want him on the roster anymore, obviously Toronto would love to get something back for him. And for Fred himself, the grass could be greener for some of those non cap space teams, maybe excluding some of the ones that I mentioned earlier. But I will say with their most recent draft, the floor for this Toronto team could be elevated a little bit. I think Brady is an awesome fit in Toronto. I'm super excited to see, some of these transition opportunities that they get, with Scotty pushing the ball, Grady running with him, in lanes on the wing or running to the corner. And then all the spacing that will come from that. And it'll be way less pressure for Scotty to all of a sudden become a knockdown shooter and add that element to his game. He can play a little more freely, worry less about the development of his shot. I mean, it's something hopefully he should still be working on daily, but we found a solution for some spacing issues in Toronto, and Grady will be an immediate impact, I think, for them.
100%, man. So VanVleet's got a decision to make here. The Raptors do as well. He's been linked to Houston for whatever reason. And it looks like Houston just continues to find themselves in this conversation for premier free agents, because the same can be said about a gentleman by the name of James Harden, who was previously with the Rockets for quite a long time, as we know. But with James Harden's situation, it's interesting because we just talked about the Rockets in their current place in the hierarchy. They're building for the future. I mean, this is not a team that has a bunch of vets on it. They just got done finishing, their season as a bottom 3 team in the league. It just doesn't look like they're ready to make a move like that. But yet there's rumors of Harden going there. I don't know how much stock I put in that. I've heard that he's torn between going to Philly and Houston. It'd just be kind of crazy to see him go back, to a team like that. That's, looks like the timelines are completely different. But I mean, you never know in this NBA. I mean, we've seen crazy things happen. We've seen things develop that we never thought would happen. So, there's that part of it. But I mean, for the Sixers, they definitely need to keep him on board, even with Maxey. I mean, Harden is still one of the premier players in our league. Just finished a $33 million contract for last season. Player option for 35. Looks like he's going to opt out and look for a new deal for more years. So it just creates an interesting situation for Philadelphia to where they're still in this championship window. I do want to see Harden come back, have this team give it another run. Uh, they have all the pieces there. I think they should have taken out Boston in the playoffs here not too long ago. They just couldn't get over the hump. But they have everything they need. They just need some good health from Embiid. Uh, Tobias just doing his thing. They have a lot of great value contracts and D'Anthony Melton at only $8 million. Guys like that. Maxi's still on a rookie deal. So the pieces are in place. They just need Harden to come back and fulfill that. But just looking at Harden's situation, I mean, do you give any do you really think it's realistic for him to leave Philly? It would just be kind of crazy looking at where they are, where he's at. He's still seeking a championship. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense in my mind for him to abandon that. I'm sure he loves Houston, but that would just kind of shock me a little bit. It would come as a surprise with everything he's done so far and what it looks like he's going to prioritize in this stage of his career.
The roster construction in Philadelphia this year, I think, was the best they've had in a long time. You know,
No doubt.
I really liked the kind of like Robert Covington, Dario Saric, wing front court duo they had a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
That was like a favorite of mine. But I think this one was really strong for them. They had a ton of depth, and I think it would make sense for them to run it back and refine some some minimum guys around the edges, and because they likely won't be able to retain everyone from their supporting cast. So getting James back could you maintain that nucleus, and then finding the right pieces around to put around him, just like what they did this past season. Maybe retaining some of the guys they had using their bird rights, hopefully can put them back on a similar trajectory. But in terms of other options, and specifically Houston, again, it's a similar thing with what I was talking about with Fred. I just don't see a reason to accelerate the timeline just yet. I think about one of the more recent teams that accelerated their timeline in Cleveland, for example. It took a few seasons to get our young players, some experience. Darius Garland, Colin Sexton, those guys had to get a lot of reps under their belt and figure things out, and go through some growing pains of the NBA. And then, lightning in a bottle, Evan Mobley had a tremendous rookie year. And, you see the discipline these guys had throughout the season, the commitment to getting better and growing as a unit, ultimately landing a play-in spot. And then you go and acquire Donovan Mitchell, and you make the home run acquisition to put yourself in a contending conversation. For Houston, I think they're still in the early stages, where they need to show some signs of improvement, some signs of life from their young guys. And with a step could be taken this year between Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Şengün, and Amen Thompson, their newest crazy athlete. We'll see how he meshes into that group, and what his role primarily will be. But you put a lot of those young players together, I'm sure you can figure out a quality product to put on the floor. And but adding James to the mix, is he the veteran to come in? First off, the timing, as I mentioned, but even if the timing is perceived correct for a leap into what ultimately is contention, if you want to acquire a guy like James Harden, is he the guy that's going to be able to keep these young players disciplined and focused in a long season with adversity? Is he the one who's going to be able to right the ship when things are going south, and young players are questioning themselves, how they fit into the system, something's not going their way, playing time is varying, I think the jury's out for me if he's going to be able to properly assume that leadership role in this stage in his career. But stranger things have happened this time of year, so we'll see.
That's true. That's my big problem with it too. It's just the fact that you bring him in, and is he going to be the best leader? And just eating up minutes from these young guys. They have a ton of guards already. They just added another one, Amon Thompson. They're going to need reps. They're going to need minutes. So I just don't like the look of him being on that team and kind of eating up some of those opportunities for the others to get a feel for how the game is played and just get that experience. So I'm just not a fan of that one. So we'll see how that goes. But I mean, I myself would be fairly surprised if he were to end up in Houston. So we'll keep an eye on that one. But while we're on the subject of big money, I mean, this is interesting. So Chris Middleton is the wing we're looking at here. That's now a free agent. He had a player option for $40 million that he turned down. There are jokes flying on Twitter. All these people are saying, like, wow, it must be nice to be able to turn down $40 million. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's a strategic move. I wouldn't expect him to re-sign. I wouldn't expect him to sign with a different team, just with the way that, Milwaukee is set up. They're set up for Chris Middleton to be their piece on the wing, to make things happen, to kind of be that glue guy, the all-around player. So I would expect him to re-sign a lower value, somewhere maybe in the 30s, the low 30s, to open up a little bit more space. The CBA is changing things. It's going to be more strict in terms of the money you're spending over the tax. The Bucks have a lot of money committed already on their books. They're going to need to kind of shave off money where they can. So, I mean, when you don't account for that $40 million on our site right now in NTC, the Bucks have about $49 million in tax space. But of course, Middleton his contract has to be added. And they have several free agents here. Brook Lopez, that's before Brook Lopez's new contract. Javon Carter's a free agent. Myers Leonard, Wesley Matthews, Thanasis. I mean, you go down the list, there's all these guys they got to re-sign. There's only about 6 players on that roster that are guaranteed for next season already right now. So they have a lot of guys they got to re-sign. They're going to run up against the tax very quickly. They're going to run into the apron space once you re-sign Chris and Brooke, and then they got to fill out on the margins. So I guess I'm not surprised that Chris opted out here. Probably going to get something like a 3-year deal for, I would say, average annual value in the low 30s, somewhere between 32 to 34 a year, something like that. I think would be fair for him. I mean, he's getting older. He had injury concerns last season, but he's still supremely valuable. Just so consistent, so versatile and efficient when he's on the court. So I think that's the route that Milwaukee's going in. I wanted to at least acknowledge that he's a free agent, even though it'd be kind of surprising if he signed with a different team. I just don't see that happening for him in this market, in this free agency period.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see him leaving Milwaukee either. However, I think he could still get paid maybe around what his option was for. I think it's the years more so is what, he's interested in. He could, I think getting on a deal with a lower amount of years could be in his best interest because if we're talking about the runway this Milwaukee team has left, and you're talking about a runway where Giannis is under contract guaranteed through the 25 season with a player option, and the following Drew will have a player option in 24, 25, and then be an unrestricted free agent, the following year. And given a coaching change this season, they're looking for a fresh start to this championship roster, and the runway for this core, I think, is about that they can run with through the end of that 24-25 season, and we can assess where the team lies and the success that they have had between now and then. And I think Chris wants to be lined up with that, with the other pillars of the organization, so that way he can be wherever he wants to be, if they're, in 3 straight finals and they want to continue running it back, we can just sign extensions off of that, and it could be kumbaya. But if things are going south, then Chris maintains the flexibility to test his options and isn't tied down to a long-term situation for a Milwaukee Bucks team that has a few years left in them with this core, but definitely doesn't have the longest runway of NBA teams moving forward.
Right.
And who knows? Maybe he wants to be the guy. He's had the opportunity to play the Batman role. Whenever Giannis is out injured, and he's definitely shown his ability to score in bunches, and his impact is incredible on the floor. Maybe he wants to do that and be the guy in a different city. So I think just keeping his options open is in his best interest, and that's kind of why I see the player option was exercised.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, he could definitely explore a little bit. I think we're on the same page. It'd be surprising if he did leave Milwaukee, because I mean, like you said, if he goes in and gets a new deal for 3 years, I mean, that puts him right in line with Giannis, right in line with Drew, even right in line with Bobby Portis if he were to turn down his player option after that extension he got. So he's right up there with everybody else. He gets his money. He solidifies his place with the franchise. And it's crazy to think about, but I mean, Giannis just finished his 10th year of service. Drew just finished his 14th. Chris just finished his 11th. So all these guys have been in the league for quite a while now. And I think they realize that they don't have a ton of time left. So they're prioritizing what they need to do, get guys their one last big contract, stick together, adjust on the margins, figure out what you got to do to stay competitive. A lot of money on the books. I'm sure they're going to figure it out. They're willing to pay the tax. The apron might come into play here depending on what they do with these guys that are free agents. I'm really interested to see what Brook gets. I would say another maybe a couple of years on his deal. A new deal would be reasonable, maybe a third. But that's pushing age 38, so I don't know about a third year. But those guys should be back, and they definitely looks like they're going to take advantage of this window that is closing, but it's still present as far as what they have going in Milwaukee. So that's kind of where they stand right now. But Oliver, let's wrap this up with one last free agent here. This free agent is also playing for a team that's window is closing. Guys are getting a little bit older in that core. Draymond Green is it looks like he's going to be a free agent as well. He had a player option. It looks like he's going to decline. Not quite $40 million, but still a decent amount of money here that he's going to opt out of. So for Draymond Green, I mean, I would say I would lean towards him resigning, but I think there's a little bit more of a chance that he signs somewhere else. There's been a lot of drama in Golden State over the past season. A lot of things happen. I mean, I don't know. I mean, he's a core part of that franchise, obviously. He's done a lot of great things for him. But I think even players like that can wear out their welcome a little bit. Maybe they're looking in a different direction. It would probably still be in their best interest to bring him back because obviously, with the move they made for Chris Paul, it looks like you want to continue to be a championship contender. You ride out Curry's prime, you ride out Clay, you keep things going. I don't think it would make a lot of sense to make that move and then him leave. That would be kind of crazy. But if he does come back, they're dealing with the apron situation. They're dealing with several huge contracts. So they're going to need to kind of figure out some stuff on the margins. But at least Chris Paul's deal that's expiring helps them in that regard. It's just going to get muddled up again if Draymond is on for another 3 or 4 years at whatever his value is, $30 million or over $30 million a season. So that's where they stand and everything like that. I mean, are you kind of the same thought that, it makes sense for everybody to just come back to Golden State, even in the midst of everything that's happened because of how much it means to that team? And it looks like they're still on a championship contender trajectory as of now.
I do think it makes most sense for Draymond to return. I mean, I think the addition of Chris Paul, can bring some new life into the team, and in terms of on court fit for him, Chris is one of the best pick and roll facilitators in this game, and imagine being in a pick and roll action where Draymond is setting hard screens for you. You've got to and rolling strong to the cup, and you have Steph Curry moving off the ball. You have Klay Thompson moving off the ball, relocating into spots for movement shots. I mean, it sounds really nice on paper. So we'll see what kind of lineups and rotations they use throughout the season to maximize, that shooting and that spacing, the movement offense that they have. But financially speaking, they could be getting themselves in a bit of trouble by signing him to some extensive money, and maybe they sign him to a 3-year deal with still lucrative salary, but then they kind of have a short leash after this season. If this season doesn't pan out the way they want, maybe they go and look to move Draymond, even while there still is some value there. And hopefully Golden State doesn't get themselves into a Brad Beal, John Collin situation where now they're, trade deadline after trade deadline, they're looking to move him. And then before you know it, he ends up getting traded in which the assets aren't necessarily matching up on the floor. But ultimately, I would like to see him back in Golden State. And if it doesn't work out short term, then who knows, maybe you can go call up Atlanta and, see if he can fit into that trade exception they just got. So
Yeah.
that's that's how I see it panning out, at least for this season. I think they still want to compete, and Draymond, obviously, one of, if not the biggest competitor in today's game.
About that, I mean, all signs point to this being the last hurrah for him and the team. The CBA bringing in those changes, his age, the age of the core, everything is just kind of pointing in that direction. Change in leadership at the top. So there's a lot of things kind of changing in Golden State. I think everybody realizes this is your last best chance to make this happen. Curry at $51 million next season, Klay at $43, Chris Paul at $30. That becomes guaranteed. I think it became guaranteed today, if I'm not mistaken. Wiggins at $24. This is all before Draymond's contract. So, I mean, as it stands, they're already in apron territory, second apron territory, because of the massive amounts of those contracts. Draymond's got to want the max, because of what he's brought to this team over the last several years. And it's just going to be really, really difficult for the Warriors if they do go in that direction. He's obviously worth a lot of money. His offense is slipping. He's getting older. He's not the same just ridiculous playmaker that he was before, defender that he was before. So it becomes harder to justify that kind of money. Of course, with Klay making 43, you're probably going to want somewhere in that ballpark. But I would say next season is probably not the big problem. It's the season afterwards to where all these penalties come into play. So it's just about how much Golden State's willing to play with fire here to bring him back and limit their tools for the next 2 to 3 years. But you brought up a good point. If it doesn't work this season, maybe it is in their best interest to trade him, to completely just kind of start over, maybe just go from scratch. Wiggins, do something Wiggins contract. I mean, that's actually not a bad value now, all things considered. Average annual value of like $26 million over the next 3 years. So there's some routes they can go, but I think it's pretty clear that this is it for them. They got to make something happen. And with the way that the financial environment is changing in the NBA, it might just kind of force them out of championship contention and go to a different direction. At some point, it just hits every team. And even Golden State, there's no exception to this rule. So that's what they're looking at, man. It's just weird times now. It's weird times for Golden State looking at that.
Yeah, would love to see a descending contract here. If we get either, what is it, 5% or 8% decreases annually, whichever one it is. If it does come time, those decreases could go a long way in facilitating a trade and fitting into a trade exception, or however they deem best. Maybe even waving and stretching or something, whatever the case may be. You get a descending contract would definitely be in Golden State's best interest.
Agreed. Pay him out year one, and then kind of work from there in years 2 and 3, 4. Go down from there. That 8%, they probably could make that 8% happen. So that would help them a lot going forward. That's something good, interesting to think about. But I think that about wraps us up, man. There's going to be a lot more free agents hitting this market. There's a lot more to happen. We just wanted to cover the big name guys and to kind of get an idea of where they might go, because they're going to set the market. Where the big guys go, everybody else kind of falls in the line from there. It's a domino effect. So hope you guys got something out of this as far as what to expect. Enjoy this conversation here. Oliver, always a good time with you, man. Hope you can make it out to Summer League. We can all kind of chop it up again. But in the meantime, great to have you on again, man. So
happy to be here. This was a fun conversation. Really good. Some really thought-provoking questions ahead of free agency that's going to be opening up in a few days. And I think we've made some solid predictions on this pod, and excited to hold ourselves accountable and see how things pan out.
We won't have to wait too much longer to find out. And in the meantime, you guys can check out our website, notradeclause.com. Cap sheets are being updated daily. As also when it comes to draft capital, that's being updated as we go along. And the same will apply once we hit free agency. Whatever you guys are looking to get out of it as far as where guys are going, what their contracts look like, we have all that on our website. And the podcast will continue. Oliver will be doing some scouting / draft videos this summer. Anil, Colin Meyer, who you see on this podcast, they'll be doing some cap series. So when you see these trades and deals go down, looking at strictly the money part of it, they're going to break all that down for you. And then, of course, I'll be here with you guys, with Oliver, with Colin, with Aaron, and some special guests bringing you some great content here. So thanks for sticking with us, guys, to this point for another episode. We're glad to have you here. And we hope to see you on another incoming installment of the NTC podcast. So take care, everybody, and hope to see you soon.